Good morning, everybody. Those of you who are listening online, there's a new voice here today. My name is Pastor John Glover, and I think, how many people were at early church? Okay, a lot of you. Okay, that's good. I'm going to refer to my sermon or expand a little bit more on my sermon this morning, but a little bit about myself. I was a parish pastor. I graduated in 1991 from Concordia Seminary. I'm a Jersey boy, as some of you know from the sermon this morning. And I graduated from seminary, as I said, 1991, parish pastor for 32 years. And I had worked with LCF and had done Lutheran Church Extension Fund campaigns. But I actually was invited to become part of the team. And I said, I guess it surprised me that I was invited to be part of the team. In fact, I said, listen, here's every personality test. I've taken every one of them. You don't want me. And then they said, oh, no, we want you. So I said, I wonder if it's like buying a car. If you really want the car, you have to say, I don't want the car, and you get the car. So it's one of those things where God said go, like I talked about this morning. God works in surprising ways in my life. And normally with me, God has to hit me over the head with a 2x4. My first wife, who I referred to in the sermon, rest in peace, she could go out, walk on a plank on faith. I would be like, well, let's see, do the numbers work? Does this work? Does that? So we kind of need both people in the church. We need the people who are kind of counting and thinking, and we need the people to say, let's go out and do this. So I've actually worked with you in the fall, some of you more closely on the ministry expansion campaign, Sharing the Joy. And I've said this to my colleagues. I've said this to you. Island Lutheran has been a fantastic church to work with. There are some churches where I have anxiety for that I'm praying, wondering how this is going to work. And I just have been amazed at the pastor, the leadership, the people I get to work with. Ask any of my colleagues, does John talk about Island Lutheran Church? I mean, it's a fantastic place. I mentioned how my call to ministry was not dramatic. People ask, well, do you come from a pastor's family? The answer is no. Very much church-going people, very faithful. I come from the Slovak wing of Lutheranism, so I'm not German. I don't have a German last name. I learned German in high school because I figure if I'm going to get along with a lot of LCMS Lutherans, ich muss Deutsch sprechen, right? But my calling actually was in away from the womb. I was born in 65. I was two and a half months premature, and my dad came home to my sister, who's 12 years older than I am, but we're very close, and said, "You've got a baby brother, but he's going to die." That's what she said this to this poor 12-year-old, and my mom prayed, Lord, well, two things. I want the baby baptized right there in the delivery room. And she prayed, Lord, if you let the baby live, I'll give him back to you. And so I had great Lutheran school teachers, and I had this general calling. My sister is a very cynical New Yorker, even though she grew up in New Jersey. She doesn't call that the blessing. She calls that the curse, right? Your mom cursed you to be in the ministry, but she's the prodigal daughter who has come back to church. So it's all a good story. So I love going about helping congregations with campaigns because there are signs of life in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and it's just fun to go around. I live in Orlando, but I cover the territory east of the Mississippi, basically, and they just threw Chicago in, southern Illinois, Oklahoma, and Kansas. But you can imagine, if you know anything about demographics, most of the Missouri Synod is about 300 to 400 miles as the crow flies from Chicago. So a lot of my work, I have to go to those Midwest climates that I complain about in the sermon. But it's really fun. A lot of work in Ohio and Indiana, and God's people are both the same and different. I've been blessed to mostly minister on the coast, California for many years. One of the blessings of taking that call to California that so surprised me is I got to meet your pastor, Pastor Dorth. We were in the same circuit years ago. And it was such a blessing and still a blessing to know him as a friend and a colleague. We had our one and only child in California. I fulfilled my dream to buy a convertible, but I bought the convertible, and then my wife we got pregnant. We had spent a long time conceiving, and what my member said to me was, if I would have known that this would have happened, I would have told you to buy that convertible years ago. Apparently it's a fertility drug of some kind, right? The convertible. So a little bit of autobiography. I'm happy to be with you and to be here this morning. Pastor Jeff asked me to teach, and I suppose the most logical thing to do is to go a little bit deeper with the lesson this morning. Normally what happens when I write a sermon is I go wide. I write a 40-minute sermon, and then I just chop. So a lot got left on the cutting room floor, which I hope we could get into today. I could pick up the bits that fell on the floor here with you. I did mention in the sermon this morning that it was a real pain to learn all those biblical names. Now, I did go to Lutheran school, and we did some of that, but we're talking granular level, not just where Jerusalem is, where Nazareth and Bethlehem are, but all those little places like Ai, Bethel, and all that. And it is fascinating that I'm sure that the people who are reading this Old Testament story, because manuscripts are very expensive, and so chances are that you would read these stories or hear these stories over and over again. So, well, let me tell you how we all came about. What is our origin story? Kind of like superheroes have origin stories. Well, the origin story starts with Abraham. And if you look at the Bible itself, this is where, and we don't have to necessarily look at all the chapters, but this is where the biblical narrative gets very specific. Chapters 1 through 11, those of you who are musical, there's what is that musical piece before the musical starts that plays all the themes? Overture. That's the word. So chapters 1 through 11 are kind of like the overture to what happens in the rest of the Bible, that we have people sinning, we have God judging the sin, and then we have God restoring them in his grace. And this is the pattern. And you had the first of those sin, judgment, grace patterns in church last week. Now, who could remember what the lesson was last week? I can't remember what I had last night for dinner. Actually, it was Benny's and I had fish. I do remember that. Benny's, right? Yeah. Great place, great venue. Last week we did Genesis 3. Right? And Genesis 3 is a story about Adam and Eve. And couples love that story because, hey, Adam, what did you do? It's the wife who made me do it, right? The blame game that goes on. But that's the first sin, right? And what does God do? He judges them, and they're expelled from the garden, but he promises a Savior, and he gives them provision, right? Then the story that comes after that is the story of two brothers, and those two brothers are Cain and Abel, and fratricide happens, right? And what does God do? He definitely judges it. That very graphic imagery, where's your brother? His blood is crying out from the ground. That always used to give me shivers, right? So again, we have sin, judgment, and grace. Cain is provided a protective mark. Then we have the story of Noah, where you've got this weird thing going on with the sons of God and the daughters of men. The judgment is the flood, but God preserves Noah. And then the last story is the Tower of Babel, where people are trying to build their way up to heaven very arrogantly. And believe it or not, this judgment, this scattering, protects humanity, right? The division of the language. But out of that comes the call of Abraham. So Abraham is kind of this pivot from this very generic story where we're getting sin, judgment, and grace. And you're getting man against woman. You're getting brother against brother. You're getting heaven against earth. You're getting nation against nation. How is God going to fix this mess? And Genesis 12 is the beginning of that specific story. And a very famous Old Testament scholar, Gerhard von Rad, says, the way things are being set up, you expect God doing like another big thing. He's done all these big gestures when it comes to humanity. But instead what he does is he picks out this one little guy in this little corner of the world, and he says, that's how I'm going to begin to turn things around. And it's fascinating. So he calls Abraham, and he calls Abram, and I know I kept going back and forth, and fortunately we got good editors at Island. I could pop in the audio and pronounce it. It's Abram, not Abraham at this point, right? And by the way, does anybody know what the word Abram means? Oh, good. Yeah,
after you get the definition of Abram.
Yeah.
Oh, easy, good.
Do I need to turn off, or is it me? Oh, good? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, Abram is like father of exalted ones. And people think, well, he got a new name, like a father of like a multitude or something like that. But probably the real story, and I didn't realize this until I was translating the Hebrew in preparation for this sermon, that his name, Abraham, probably is not a real name change as much as it is a dialectical variation. So Abram is what he'd be called in Haran, but his name, Abraham, is what he'd be called in Canaan. Kind of like if I'm in England, I'm called John, but if I'm in Spain, I'm called Juan, right? Well, it's more of that kind of a thing.
Well, that was my question.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Good. I like how, yeah. And it's not quite analogous, but did you notice in the New Testament, when Paul, before he's a Christian, what's his name? Saul, right? And when does he become Paul? When do they refer to him as Paul? It's when he starts to go out of the Holy Land, right? So it's like a similar thing. Like, it's going to be no good. It's not going to be intelligible for me to be called by this name. I'm going to kind of adapt a bit to the culture. And I know that in some cultures, like my organist, my last church is from Korea. Her name is Hae-jin, and it's a Christian name. It means grace. So in some circles, rather than having them, say this name, which is not used there, they'll just, hey, my name is Grace, because that's my name, right? And often, I've noticed this with some other Asian people, you're not going to be able to pronounce my name. Just call me Bill, right? Or whatever. And by the way, she went to grad school at UF, and they tried to play a trick on her. She says, I'm looking for, what could be my American name? And you know what names they were suggesting for this woman in her 30s, now 40s? Gertie and Myrtle. I think they were playing a joke on her, so. Not nice. I'm like, just go, or Matilda, right? Just, names that aren't current anymore, but just go with Grace. I'm sorry, did anybody else have a question? So this is just preliminary. And then we've got. Should we read the text over? So it's all. Let's look at Genesis chapter 12, because that's all overture. And I guess because I'm online, I should read it. And I'm going to. Do you have the ESV? All right, let me switch to the ESV on my Bible here. Whoops. Where are you, ESV? Here we go. Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, lech lecha, you go, and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, that'd be his nephew, I guess, right? And all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At the time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give you this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abraham journeyed on, still going towards the Negev. That is the text. So, as I said, I had to learn all those place names, and a couple of these stick out to me in my mind, of course. One is Shechem, and again, cutting room floor. This place has been this site has been inhabited at least 1,000 years before Abraham. People had a tendency to settle where there was water, and how many of you been to the land of Israel? Anybody? Yeah, the Holy Land. Yeah. Have you been to Jacob's Well? Kind of that's in the area. I didn't have the guts to take a drink out of the cup. I saw all these pilgrims there, and I'm a little germophobic, and I couldn't do it. Right? There's a well. There's a water source there. It's at the confluence. It's near a mountain pass. It's at the intersection of 3 continents. Like I said, a perfect place to set up shop. And of course, if you know the background, if you're hearing these stories as a kid growing up, you know that Shechem figures in the Holy Land. It's both a place of triumph, but it's also a place of destruction. You might remember famously that the sons of Levi slaughtered the population of Shechem. They want to marry the sons of Jacob. He had some troublesome, hot-headed sons, and one of the women, Dinah, their girl Dinah, as in someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Dinah wanted to marry this guy who was a Shechemite. And they said, well, the only way that you're going to do this is if all the men are circumcised, and while they're healing from their surgery, they slaughter the population at Shechem. So Shechem has some kind of unsavory associations. It's also a major city in the northern kingdom. Probably, the women at the well, Jacob's well, that figures in the story. So there's all kinds of history. What about Bethel? What do you know about Bethel? Think Jacob's story. He's the one who actually names it Bethel. So this is a little anachronistic name. Jacob isn't alive yet, but Bethel is where Jacob's ladder is, where he lays down to sleep, and what does he see? He sees the angels ascending and descending, yeah. And he woke up and he said, "This is the house of God. This is the gateway of heaven." And funny story about that the stone that he slept on, the rabbis took that stone and they placed that into the Holy of Holies that Jesus knew in his day. There was an Ark of the Covenant, and after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, there is no more Ark anymore. It's never rebuilt. It disappears. That's how Steven Spielberg can get his whole backstory about Raiders of the Lost Ark, because probably what happened, it was just chopped up and because it was overlaid with gold, and they just made things out of it or whatever, right? But they never built another ark with all that gold. Instead, what they did is they went up to Bethel and they found the stone that they said, oh, this is the stone that Jacob slept on. This is the portal. This is the doorway to heaven. We're going to move the doorway from Bethel down to the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem. So that's what they would go in there and put the incense once a year. Caiaphas and all those guys. It wasn't an ark, it was that stone. In fact, when Pompey conquered Jerusalem in the 60s BC, forget the exact date, 67 or 63, he went in there to the Holy of Holies. Of course, the Jews are horrified. They say, don't do this. And they actually go in and they stick some poles in, kind of like Indiana Jones. You don't want to get trapped. Maybe there's something that's going to chop you up in there, a grinder, a buzzsaw, whatever. He goes in there and he's like, I'm not that impressed because there's nothing but that stone in there. There's nothing but the stone. But again, what seems to happen during the patriarchal period is that they set up where there's already existing worship of some kind. Definitely in the ancient world, oaks were associated with connection to the divine. In a culture, in a very arid country, which is constantly struggling with famine and water shortages, here's this tall oak, big thing that is blooming and green. So it became associated with divinity or places where you can encounter God. So in a sense, Abraham goes to places where people are already doing something, and he kind of claims it for God. And the patriarchs do this too. They set up sanctuaries at Beersheba, Bethel, Shechem, and one other place I can't remember. And then they set up altars there too. So it's a very very fascinating how God works. And this also happens sometime in missionary work, quite frankly, that this is a big debate in mission work. Like when you go to a new culture, how much of the culture can you take in order to share the gospel? How much do you have to say, that's not going to work? So for instance, I'm not, I can't think of it, but often what would happen is that the missionaries, at least the Catholic missionaries, they would go to a place where there was already an existing place of worship, and they'd basically plant the cross on it. They'd say, okay, this is the true God. You're already coming to this place. We're going to build something here. They probably did all kinds of stuff to sanctify it. But this is the place where people come to. Let's not find a place that they're unfamiliar with. Let's build on what they already know in order to share the gospel in this place. So that's probably what's going on with the patriarchs as they move around. They're working with existing structures and existing zip codes in order to share the gospel. And some might be scandalized by this. Well, wait a second, isn't that confusing? I'm like, well, dealing with people is very messy, and they don't let go of their old gods very easily. Nor do we, by the way. Ours are just more sophisticated, right? But I remember one of our missionaries talked about he had this big ceremony where the Lutheran Church was established in some African country, and there was a big celebration, a joint worship service, and then the son poured out a libation to some god to kind of celebrate it. It's like, oh, we got a long way to go here, right? So there's that kind of mixing that needs to be sorted out. And the question is do you rip the Band-Aid quickly, or do you work and say, well, you're not quite there yet. Let's kind of take you where you are and kind of move you. And I have to admit, that's just a big argument that people struggle with that. Can we use this word for God? What's the best word for God? Or in Buddhist culture, the idea of God suffering, when Buddhists are trying to escape suffering, how are we going to get around that? Maybe we're going to need to emphasize Christ as victor more than Christ as one who suffers. It just depends on the culture. Anyway, I'm spitballing here, so I apologize. Do you need time? As I understand, what you do is you spend some time at your tables, and then you come back and chat. Maybe as we've read the text, it's prompted stuff. Maybe I'm confusing you more. Maybe we should just take like 5 minutes to chat amongst ourselves, and then we'll throw out any questions to me about the text or the context. That'd be probably the best way to proceed. So let's do that, just about 5 minutes. All right, let's bring it on back. Any questions? Any questions? You have a question? What? Oh, let's get you on. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. You gotta get it on the mic for the whole world to hear. This stuff never goes away.
Oh, dear. When Abram left Ur, to go to this country, was it called Canaan at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. When Abraham left Ur, was it called Canaan at the time? I believe that is the case. I think the Egyptians might have named that, but you know what I love about the Bible dictionary? I could actually get you an instantaneous answer. Yeah, there you go. Let me see here. I look at that, the Chalcolithic period. There was a lot of altars from the Israelite age. I'll have to get back to you. That is a great question. I believe it is the case that it's Ka'anan in the Egyptian letters. It was kind of an Egyptian district, ruling district. So the time that Abraham and the patriarchs and David and the judges, that's a time when Canaanite control by Egypt has receded. And so in a way, providentially, that's the time that Abraham and his descendants and David's kingdom arises. So yeah, I believe that's the case. Now the name Palestine is a Roman name. That's where it gets the name Palestine. There are also references what Israel is called by other people. Sometimes it's named by who's ruling. So the northern kingdom is not called the kingdom of Israel by outsiders. It's called like the house of the land of Omri, one of the kings, or the house of David kind of rules that area. They're probably considered to be more like city-states than they are countries in the modern sense of the word, yeah. And ethnically, when Israelites are referred to as an ethnic group, they're called Hebrews. And they're all broadly part of a West Semitic language, so they can understand each other. You can understand Moabite and Ammonite. I can't, but you can. It's similar to kind of how all the Latin languages, you could kind of sort out a lot of the language. But yeah, it's known as that, the land of the Canaanim, and I think, yeah, but I'll get a definitive answer. I'll get a definitive answer for you. That's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah, Ken.
Why did Lot go with him? Because my kids would say, "You have fun with that, Dad."
Yeah. You know, to be honest, we don't know the answer to that. I do find it fascinating that Abraham is called to go, and he doesn't specify Lot, but that's kind of an argument from silence, because is Lot considered to be part of his overall possessions and household? Kind of is. But I'm glad you picked up on Lot, because people are probably listening to that story saying, uh-oh, trouble's coming. Yeah, it's like we know this story. There's the fighting, and then there's Lot and his daughters, and which, by the way, never comes up as a scripture text on a Sunday morning, right? Which, by the way, do you know that that's on purpose, that the people who designed our series of readings, one criterion was, is it appropriate to read in mixed company with adults and children present? Yeah. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Old German way. Or Victorian maybe, right? Where do you see, another question. Kevin with an E, right? Yeah.
Well, it's not really a question. It's just an observation. Like, I wish that I could be sure when God is telling me what I should do.
Yeah.
And obviously it was very clear that God was speaking to Abram. And I wish God was still that way. And then the other thing is just, I admire how he just dropped his whole life and just followed God from place to place.
Yeah. He took a lot of money with him, though. All his possessions. That's a great question. Yeah, right. The issue, that's I have to admit, that kind of figuring out what God is telling us, that makes Lutherans kind of cringy a little bit. And that's not a criticism, because believe me, God has to hit me over the head with a 2x4. I see that call to go to California that I talked about, or a call to be with LCF, is very much like, you're so dumb, I got to put in front of you, right? Obviously, what we talk about is we use the word as a control. Like, I had a Baptist friend who used to joke, like, yeah, we get out of hand with talking about the Lord's will. The joke was, it feels so good, so it must be God's will because it feels so good to me, right? I mean, they kind of joke like we could justify a lot of stuff where we see the Lord is calling us. And maybe it's more like if we're being called to something that's really against God's will in the Bible, he's going to kind of be like the GPS. Say, we got a lot of freedom in this life. That as outside of our spiritual life, we can do all kinds of things, and God is going to bless whatever we do. He's going to use it for his kingdom. Whatever vocation because we can live sometimes, if I only did this, if I only did that, if I only would have done that, if I only would have chosen this arc, my life would have been different. It's like, well, that's why Luther will sometimes say, sin boldly. That doesn't mean like go out and break the commandments. He means sometimes you're faced with choices in life where there is not a clear answer. You step out, trust God, and if it's messed up, he's in the forgiveness business, right? That's what he does. So it's sin boldly because God is going to be with you wherever you go. Yeah, but the question of calling is a big thing, and like when a pastor considers a call, they really didn't give us good guidance about how you sort that out. Like they talked, well, it's a time to evaluate where you are, where you need to be. Is God calling you something different? There used to be a piety which said, the worse the call, the better. So if you grew up in suburban New Jersey and you get a call to rural North Dakota, you take that. Even though you're going to be in a total culture clash and your wife is giving you the side eye, what are we doing here? Like, I had a pastor friend where it just came to him in the service that he was moving from one locale to another. He announced it to the congregation, and his family was sitting there. We're getting that news in real time, too. They were just as shocked as the rest of the congregation, and it's like, what are you thinking, Jim? What are you thinking? Still married. But they still talk about that, like, what happened to Dad? What happened to Dad that week? Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Do we know where Abram came from? It says, go from your country. What country are we talking about?
I think doesn't Acts, when Stephen is describing it, he describes him from Ur of the Chaldeans. So he's at, I don't have a map, but you know how there's the crescent, the Fertile Crescent, because you can't go across that desert, so you have to go around. So he's kind of where Iraq and Iran are, way at the Gulf of the Persian Gulf, and he's kind of making his way in an arc to the land of Canaan, because you can't go across. And I don't know if I don't even know if camels can make it. I think they can, but that's a big debate, by the way, in the Bible. When you hear about camels, when are camels domesticated versus when they're talked about in the Bible? That's their version of the train, right? Or the ability to travel distances. But yeah, it's basically the Persian Gulf, Iraq, Iran area. How is God's grace manifest in this story? A very Lutheran concern. I didn't so much touch on this. I touched about calling today, how we're planted in a specific zip code. There's one that lies outside the story, but think about what God says here. He's the one doing the communicating. He just says, go. And then what are the next words out of God's mouth? All promise. He didn't say, fly right. If you measure up to my standards, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you a blessing to the nations. I'm going to make your name great. He didn't put any criterion on that. He did not say, you do these things and then I will bless you. He actually blesses him in advance, knowing all the history that's going to happen, all the ways that Abraham is going to mess up in the future. And by the way, when Israel really gets in trouble, because you know the story, their story does not end well, right? It ends with death and destruction. When they want to appeal to God, they don't appeal to, hey, look at all the commandments we did at Mount Sinai. We're really trying to get these 613 commandments right. All they do is they say, remember Abraham. Remember Abraham. Go back to, we're not appealing to what we're doing. We're appealing to the promise. And that's where Paul ends in the New Testament. When he wants to hold up Abraham as our father, he says it's all about the promise. That what makes you a child of Abraham is that you get the promise in Jesus. It's as simple as that. Again, passivity, grace, not works. Something that's also fascinating to me is how gracious God's calling is. The rabbis, again, different faith tradition, but the rabbis ponder this. They say, why did God call Abraham? Why did he do it? And they make up a backstory. They say out of all the people in the world at that time, Abraham was the only monotheist. But that's not true. When you go to Joshua 24, I think it's Joshua 24. Let me see if I could find it. When Joshua is encouraging people to be faithful, I think it's Joshua 24. He's recounting all the works of God. Yeah, 24 verse 2. Joshua said to all the people, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates. Terah, the father of Abraham, of Nahor. And what's the line there if you've gotten to that point? They served other gods. So sorry, rabbis. Joshua 24 verse 2 says, God called an idolater. I think that's awesome grace in the story. Those are the people he calls. The God is always the one who is taking the first, he's taking the initiative always.
But isn't that why he let them be taken into captivity?
Because of their idolatry. Yeah, for sure.
He allowed it.
Yeah, he did. But he also said, kind of like when the person AA, they talk about people who have to hit bottom and realize that they're unable to save themselves. He did say, he promises that right in the Torah, you are gonna mess up. I know how this story ends, but I'm gonna be there on the other side of it. When you finally hit bottom and realize that there is no one but I'll be here to restore you. But the problem is that, not a problem, but God's heart aches for this. When you read the prophets, he's anguished over what his people are doing. It's like you're my wife, and you've cheated on me. You're my first love, and you wanted me. I gave you all these things, and it's breaking my heart. And it's kind of like, I've got to let you fall. I've got to let you learn that lesson. And maybe you've been like that as a parent, like you say, oh, I've given all the advice, but you know how it goes, that some of the best lessons we learn are when we're in pain, right? Or when we actually fall. It's a very helpless feeling, obviously. But you never stop, God never stops reaching out. When I talked about my prodigal sister, and believe me, she gave me many sermon illustrations. But she loved it. She says any publicity is good, even if it's bad publicity. And when she was really butting heads with my mom said, I love you, and I'll never stop praying for you. You can't stop me from praying for you. And I thought that was like a very gracious way. It wasn't like I'm more pious than you. It's like, I love you, and I'll be here, right? And I'm praying that I'll see the other side of this, which she did. But yeah, so that's, anyway. Yeah, there's a lot. You're kind of getting a preview of all the stuff that's coming. What else is in that story? You've got Abraham taking matters into his own hands because God is slow about keeping his promises. And Luther had a great insight about the pattern of God in the Bible based on the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God promises, the promise is threatened, and then God reaffirms the promise. And he turned to his class of future pastors and said, why does God do this? The answer, he said honestly, is I don't know. But that's what happens. God promises. The promise is threatened somehow. Well, look at how it happened in Abraham's story. We're childless. Sarah says, let's take the matters into our own hands. And then there was a chance that Ishmael could be the chosen descendant. And then there was conflict between them. And things had to be straightened out. Or you look at the story of Jacob, right? And he gets the same promise as Abraham, and yet he's got that whole thing going on with his father-in-law trying to cheat him and physically threatening him, right? He comes after him with a posse. He's got his brother Esau. And you've got the Joseph story in Egypt, right? God promised him to be a great nation. What are we doing in Egypt? What are we doing here in this, slavery and all that stuff? And that seems to be, well, I've said this with congregations on campaigns. I said this with people who have come to the church, they're on a spiritual high. I said, I want to celebrate, but I also want to pray for you because now comes the time of testing, right? That there's always something when things are going well, there are these times of testing. And again, I don't know why, but I've just seen it. I have a sense is that what it's supposed to do is drive us back to God and relying on him. Like, we're getting too big for our britches. Look at all the great work that we have done, or look at what I have done, and then it drives you back to your knees, or drives you back to the Lord's Supper, things like that. I think that's the pattern. I really do. Yeah, there's a lot there. The book that I referred to, the gentleman that I referred to, free commercial for him, I get no commission. But I've read several of this guy's book. His name is Dave Zoll, and this is his latest book called The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace for a Worn-Out World. And he's been really good. Martin Luther's issue was, I know we're running out of time here. Martin Luther's issue was, how can I get right with an angry God? I'm in this system of works, and I have to keep striving in order to get right with God. What Dave says in many of his books is that people are still bound by the law, but now they call it the universe or something. The universe is against me, and I can't measure up. Or there was a book, I never read it, but it was like The Secret or something. You heard it right? Okay, so what that is saying if you follow these laws, the universe will bend your way. That's no different than what Luther was talking about, right? And so he thinks that that what people are needing is relief, and so the chapters are great. This is basically how to understand the word grace and the relief from deserving, the relief from regret. These are the subtitles: the relief from rejection, the relief from control, the relief from guilt, the relief from status anxiety, the relief from keeping up, the relief from productivity, the relief from captivity and death. So those are the subtitles, and there's a word associated with each: grace, forgiveness, favor, surrender. So the one for the relief from control, the gospel word there is surrender, right? The relief from regret, forgiveness. The relief from status anxiety, imputation. In other words, you're regarded by God as having the highest status. Some people will say, I don't care what other people think. I only care what God thinks of me. We're obsessed by status. When my dad heard that I was a vice president now, I was like, whoa, you're a vice president. And I said, Dad, it's kind of like Saudi Arabia where everybody's called a prince. It doesn't really mean anything. They got to just come up with a title, right? So anyway, this is a great book. So he thinks that the malady of modern humans, at least rich, Western, middle class, upper class people, is we are struggling with the idea, are we enough? Are we enough? And so my contention, as I said in the sermon, I couldn't really unpack it because I had 12 to 15 minutes, is that's how the gospel can speak to this culture, that you actually are enough, that you could come to a place where you're not going to be measured by are you good enough. And if we're doing our job correctly, we're going to get a lot of broken people. We're going to get weird people. We're going to get cantankerous people. They're going to show up at our voters' meetings and be a pain in the butt. But if we're really grace-filled people, we're going to look more like a hospital than a gym. And believe me, I think spiritual growth is real, but it's, like I said, it's more of a zig and a zag than a straight line. So I hope that Island, and I know Island will be a place of compassion and relief. You know, that's my prayer for you guys. So anyway, amen. We better wrap it up a little early. Pastor Jeff said he usually goes to 10:40. He said if I was done at 10:30, everybody would consider me to be really popular. So I didn't quite do that, but it's a delight to be with you, and let me carry on with my monologues. I've had 2 this morning so far. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Amen. Thank you, everybody.